Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Caroline Hyde of Bloomberg and the Right Honorable Nick Clegg of Meta.
I hope everyone has a caffeinated beverage in their hand. Happy mid-hump day of Unga Week and all this collaboration. It's wonderful to be here with you.
Very good to be here.
Now, AI, we're going to talk artificial intelligence, the risk factors, the rewards. It's a noisy old place. Boy, we swing from it's going to supercharge all of our productivity to it's going to mass extinction. We're going to have all, general death and destruction. And amongst all this noise rose one headline where luckily you came to the fore and said, look, these large language models, they're a bit stupid. And I loved that clarity of thought. And I wanted to know, do you still stick by that? Do you feel at this moment LLMs, the AI, the hype is a little bit ahead of the technology?
Yeah, I do think the hype is running ahead of the technology. And what I meant by that was something very specific, which is these large language models, they have no autonomy. They have no agency. They don't know innately anything. They are pattern recognition systems. They're like a sort of giant sort of autocomplete tool. They're working on huge amounts of data, and you apply billions of parameters to them, and they can recognize patterns, and they literally just they turn words into tokens, and they guess the next word with sometimes unnerving accuracy in response to prompts that you make. But they don't have any autonomous because I think a lot of the breathless talk, I think it's settling down a bit now, but certainly a few months ago there was this assumption that you could go from ChatGPT to sort of demonic machines that are going to turn us into paperclips by next Tuesday in a heartbeat. And I think that's what I was trying to dispel that a bit, which is, in the end, these large language models, they can't reproduce themselves. They don't have any agency themselves. They can't exfiltrate data. Now, if that becomes a reality, and in a sense, these large language models prove to be a stepping stone to what is commonly called artificial general intelligence, something which has a sort of, as the name implies, a sort of general autonomous intelligence. Of course, then I think you're in a different ballgame. Then you're in a totally different ballgame. There's a debate amongst the experts, as you might know, where some people think these large language models are a significant step towards that future. Yeah. Others think they're a significant step into a cul-de-sac, because there are some. If you look at the three, so-called godfathers of modern AI, Yoshua Bengio, Jeff Hinton, and Yann LeCun. Yoshua Bengio, I think, is at academia in Canada. Jeff Hinton, who was until recently in Google. Yann LeCun, who's a professor here in NYU and is our chief AI data scientist. They themselves don't quite agree about the future. Some think that we are relatively close to that AGI future. Others, Yann LeCun and others, feel that, in fact, you need to pursue a completely different AI paradigm, and that this particular approach, whilst remarkable, truly remarkable, and these are very powerful tools, nonetheless will have somewhat almost diminishing returns, because how many times can you consume and reconsume the internet, to put it glibly?
But what about any sort of agreement on whether one should be open sourcing or not? Because a lot of the commentators and your own communication around it came out when Llama 2 was announced and given freely for those to build upon, to work with. And I think another slightly breathless comment from an academic in the UK was, you're basically given a template for a nuclear bomb. Yeah. Now, do you still feel that open source and everyone being able to iterate and perfect is the safer route, the responsible route?
Yes, we do. At this stage of development, I've got to be very clear for those who sort of follow this debate about open sourcing versus closed proprietary models. I don't think it's important not to be sort of dogmatic about it. Of course, there's a space for a mix of proprietary and closed and open and widely shared models. And by the way, there are AI tools which we have deliberately decided not to open source. There was just, I think, over the summer that we had our researchers came up with a remarkable tool that can take a snippet of your voice and then extrapolate that to mimic your voice perfectly. And we didn't, for obvious reasons, open source that. But in general, Meta as a company has believed, for a long time, by the way, this is not new, that in general, if you can democratize access to technology, it's in our interest. we're a business, we're not a charity. It's our interest because it creates a flywheel of innovation which we can then reincorporate into our products. But we also think it's actually better for society as a whole because it means that researchers and investigators and academics don't need to build a whole large language model themselves. They can, in a sense, use it off the shelf from us. They can download it, they can run it on Windows, and so on. And as you may remember, we open sourced Llama 2 in partnership with Microsoft, and it's on AWS as well, and so on. But in general, we've believed that open sourcing is good, and over the last decade, we have open sourced over 1,000 AI databases and models. And by the way, some of those are foundational sort of bits of the kind of AI architecture that everyone uses. So PyTorch, which is used by the whole AI sector, was devised by Facebook AI researchers. So we think where it is responsible to do so, and of course you need to be responsible, you need to stress test it. We had, I think, around 350 people red teaming Llama 2 before it was open source.
Red teaming being
where you sort of you try and break it, you try and test it, you try and probe its vulnerabilities. Ourselves, alongside a lot of the other main AI players, we all submitted versions of Llama 2 to DEF CON in Las Vegas over the summer for hackers to be able to try and do their best, or rather their worst, as well, to probe it. We published a 75-page research document explaining exactly how the model works, how we assembled it, what stress testing we did, and we got obviously responsible use guides and so on. So I think, of course, you need those guardrails. You can't ever guarantee. This is important to be open about this and acknowledge this. When it comes to this, it's because it's foundational technology. It's like an operating system. It's something which pervades everything, and lots of things will be built on top of it. Of course, you can never perfectly predict how it will be used, and you can't perfectly sort of litigate for that in advance. And no doubt there will be people who will try and use it for bad purposes. But in general, it is accepted in the sector that open sourcing these things leads to safer models because you can then openly look for vulnerabilities and fix them. And that's certainly the attitude that we believe is right at this stage on this great AI journey.
You can't litigate ahead of time. Can you regulate ahead of time?
Yeah.
Because here we are sat with public-private partnerships, with civil society, with human rights viewpoints. You were just at Washington with exactly the same sort of voices in the room, an extraordinary group of top CEOs and indeed then civil society looking at ways to regulate.
Yeah.
Is America leading the charge there, or other countries?
Well, there's endless conversations going on. I was, alongside other folk from the other big American sort of leading AI companies, we were all in Washington over the summer, signing up to a series of voluntary commitments that the White House had worked with us on. They're actually quite meaningful about, open access for researchers, stress testing and red teaming the models, watermarking to, where you can, to make sure that the provenance and the detectability of AI content is made as particularly visual and sort of image content. It's slightly different with text. It's super difficult already to tell whether a piece of text has been produced by a machine or a human being. But so we made all those commitments. You've got the European Union rushing to pass an AI Act. Well, actually, no, maybe that's a bit unfair. They've been at this for I think for 2 or 3 years. But I think they've, quite understandably from their point of view, accelerated it a bit after all the kind of brouhaha around ChatGPT and the interest in generative AI. The Japanese are running a G7 process, or overseeing a G7 process, the Hiroshima process, which is trying to align G7 approaches. The UK
You're off there?
I will be there probably in early October. In early November, the United Kingdom government is hosting a conference on AI.
We're all having parties. Everyone's having an AI party.
So in a sense, politicians and regulators are doing what they do, and I was a politician myself for close to 20 years. You kind of rush to the hot issue of the moment, and everybody wants to try and come up with the answers. I think we're still in a slightly incoherent sort of phase. We're at the sort of top of the funnel before you really narrow down to a consensus on where are the risks. Are they proximate or are they distant? what kind of regulation in terms of transparency, in terms of provenance and detectability? How much does that need to be enshrined in new legislation, or how much can it be covered by existing legislation? So I think everyone's slightly sort of feeling their way. My hope, my fervent hope, is that out of all of this somewhat sort of frenzied summitry will come an emerging consensus amongst the big techno-democracies, most especially the US, the European Union and India, on what the kind of, not precisely, not every sort of dotted I and crossed T, but the basic tram lines, because like all of this technology, it doesn't respect borders. I think if you can get some fundamental values enshrined into transparency, user control, responsibility, safety, and so on, agreed upon particularly by those three main.
But what about China?
Well, it's a very good question. Now, China, of course, runs the internet, or runs its internet, if I could put it like that. And I don't mean this sort of accusatorily. It is different. It's a different paradigm. It's walled off from the rest of the internet. I always say this to people. They always seem somewhat surprised. The global internet doesn't exist. It hasn't existed for ages. We've got a Chinese internet. You've got a non-Chinese internet. It's why our services, for instance, aren't available to people in China. And they exercise great sovereignty within their own sort of internet boundaries, if I can put it like that. There's clearly extensive surveillance of what goes on there. So it is a really interesting question. In an ideal world, of course you would want alignment between, because you've got some very big Chinese companies as well as big American companies who, like the big American companies, like Meta and others, have got the capacity, the compute capacity and the data capacity to develop these big models. Their capacities might differ slightly, but broadly speaking, everyone's on the same journey. So of course, ideally, you'd want some alignment. And I really don't mean this in a sort of belligerent way. I think it's just going to be and I noticed yesterday, I think in the press, that the UK government have said that they're in one shape or form going to include Chinese representation to their summit, which may be a good idea. I suspect, however, that attitudes towards data privacy, data protection, user sovereignty, and so on, it just is very different. In this part of the world as it is compared to that part of the world. So I suspect it might be easier just to get sort of first mover consensus amongst what I loosely call the sort of large techno democracies. But if in the midst of all of that dialogue, we have to continue to have a dialogue, whether it's on climate change or whether it's on AI, on these major systemic issues, on as global a level as possible. That's clearly desirable.
Do you think, having ridden through, 5 years that you've now been at Meta, and all the hand-wringing that ultimately regulation wasn't there in time for the era of social media and safety and misinformation. Now we have the DSA, now we have Europe bringing in some really key regulation. Now we still have a lot of questions unanswered in the US. We look at crypto regulation, many feeling that wasn't in existence. Do you think we're doing it differently this time? Or are we being too glib to think that we're early in AI? And we're not really. We've been using AI and algorithms forever. We're just using it in a ChatGPT manner now.
Well, that point is a really important point, actually, that last point. And I think it's often overlooked, as people talk about it as if AI was invented last spring or something. I mean, it's been around, it's been talked about since the 1950s. We've been using AI. It pervades every aspect of our systems. And by the way, again, really important point to make, because totally understandably, it's just human nature being what it is. You gravitate towards the risks and the threats. It's worth, of course, the potential of AI to provide everything from personalized education to better cancer diagnosis to instant holiday planning for anyone that's planning their next summer holiday. All of that is true. But in our world, in the social media world, AI has long been an incredibly powerful sort of sword, not just shield.
Moderating.
Look, if we didn't have AI running in our systems, you would have far, far higher levels of misinformation, hate speech. Just take hate speech. The prevalence of hate speech on Facebook now is down to about 0.02%. And by the way, I'm not just making that up. That's stuff that stats we publish every quarter, and they're audited by, I think it's EY independently, so we're not just marking our own homework. So that for every 10,000 bits of content that you'd see online on Facebook, 2 bits of content might be hate speech. And that is down by about 50, 60% over the last couple of years for one reason only. AI, because our classifiers are just getting much better. So I think it's worth remembering, particularly, and you and I talked about this backstage, particularly in advance of all of these hugely consequential elections which are happening next year, India, the US, Mexico, the European Union, possibly the UK and so on, that yes, generative AI might enable bad people to try and generate bad and misleading content more quickly. It also allows platforms like us to act against that much more quickly. So it is an adversarial space where hopefully, and that's our task, that we can use those tools more nimbly and more effective than our adversaries. That wasn't the question you asked. What was the question you asked? But I hoped it was interesting nonetheless.
Well, but ultimately, whether Pandora's box is already open on AI in terms of practically regulating, because people sat here are excited about the opportunity, worried about the risks, but actually want tangible things to take away of how to solve these risks. Are tangible things able to be executed now, or has it already actually gone out the door?
No, I think tangible things can. I think it's in everybody's interest. And I say this on behalf of a company that's obviously been wading through controversy for many years around, we are unfortunately or fortunately in a controversial business. We're in the business of human speech, which is one of the most sort of fluid, difficult, controversial things you can imagine. We don't produce widgets or send rockets up into the sky. We're in the business of human speech, which is always a contested space. And there's been this great pendulum swing, mood swing from tech euphoria a decade and a half ago. And Facebook and social media was going to be the solution to all our problems. Democracy was going to flourish. Everybody was going to love each other and so on. And then it was the sort of solution to all our problems. And now, of course, the pendulum has swung to the other extreme, which is it's the genesis and the source for all of our problems. Neither, of course, are true. It's neither the solution to all our problems or the genesis of all of them. It's always, the truth is always somewhere in between. And then, as you say, regulators have sort of spent some time trying to sort of catch up with that and are now bolting on almost retrospectively legislation, much of which, by the way, just reflects stuff that actually the industry itself has developed over the last decade and a half. I think it is in everybody's interest to avoid that kind of violent mood swing again, where we go from sort of euphoria about AI to kind of hysterical pessimism.
We're already there.
Well, yeah, it seems to have gone rather quickly from. But for that reason, I think it's a good thing that the industry and regulators and governments are trying to have, certainly that's my experience, pretty mature and candid conversations about where the tram lines might need to be drawn, where current legislation is fit for purpose, where the gaps might need to be filled in. My own view, for what it's worth, as an ex-legislator, is rather than trying to pass great big jumbo omnibus legislations that try and deal with everything from existential death to bioweapons to misinformation, it's much better to really just take a calm look at where current legislation, a lot of which can apply to these technologies, is lacking and where the gaps need to be filled in. I think if you can get the industry to have common and clear and exacting standards of transparency, so that the industry is forced to explain how these models are assembled, how they operate, what data has been used, what data has not been used, and then clear industry standards on how to detect and watermark and show the provenance of AI. It might sound boring, just those two steps, having that applied evenly to the big players as well as the small players, the incumbents as well as the new market entrants, wherever they operate around the world. Because remember, we talk about open sourcing. I think one of the most powerful open source models today is called the Falcon model, which came out of UAE. It's not all coming out of Silicon Valley, and many other models will be open source soon. I know that Mistral, the French AI company, actually,
which came out of
a lot of meta data engineers went and worked there. So this is going to keep going. So new entrants will come in, new innovations will happen. We're announcing next Wednesday on the 27th new applications of generative AI in our products, things like you'll be able to communicate with businesses on WhatsApp and Messenger, these sort of really, really extraordinary AI-powered bots. That will transform the way that all of us as consumers interact with businesses, and many other things that we'll announce next Wednesday. So it's moving fast, but if you can just have basic standards on transparency and on...
And do you think you're getting there, having been in the room with
I think
wannabe cage matchers?
My own view is the sooner we can get beyond the kind of, oh my gosh, is it going to be the end of the world kind of thing, which I think has a paralyzing effect on the debate. It doesn't, it just, everyone goes, ah.
And when there's bias in the here and now.
And yes, I think there are a lot of here and now issues that we can deal with, whether it's elections, whether it's misinformation, whether it's transparency, whether it's provenance. And I certainly urge lawmakers to kind of, fixate on that, Don't fixate on a future which may arise, and of course we should continue to talk about it, but if you spend all your time trying to anticipate a tomorrow which hasn't arrived yet, you won't fix the issues that we know are present today.
In the present today, with 22 seconds, how are you using generative AI, chatbots? In your everyday, are you ordering your groceries on it? Are you helping your sons?
No, I'm not helping my son's homework. I was up at 5:30 this morning correcting an essay on Lord of the Flies. I thought, no, we're not correcting, sorry, providing fatherly advice. I've run out of time.
So ChatGPT didn't help you with Lord of the Flies?
No, it didn't. No.
Nick, it's great to have you really talk about some of the conversations you're privy with, the people that you're speaking on, and how you're trying to make a bit of an impact in the way in which we regulate. So thank you very much indeed. Nick Clegg, of course, of Meta. Thank you to everyone in the audience.